Episode 1. The shutter that shouldn't have clicked. I never believed in curses. I believed in exposure, in lighting, in the split-second honesty of a shutter. But that was before the click that shouldn't have happened. The day I found the camera, the rain was folding the streets of Brooklyn into silver ribbons. I was broke, half drunk on despair, and wandering through a flea market that smelled like dust and endings. The stall owner was an old man with cataract eyes, guarding a table full of dead memories. Typewriters, cracked lenses, and one camera that seemed to hum when I looked at it. It was a black-body Leica, pre-war, heavy as guilt. The man told me it once belonged to a war photographer who vanished mid-assignment. He leaned close and whispered, "Never use flash in the dark. It sees more than light." Then he laughed, like someone who'd been living with that sentence too long. I bought it anyway. $50 and a lie to myself that I could make it mean something. That night, I set up a shoot in my tiny studio apartment. One naked bulb, one mirror, one test subject. Me. The room smelled of fixer and coffee. I adjusted the focus, checked the aperture, and felt something off. The shutter lever was warm, as if someone had just touched it. I hesitated. The rain outside had stopped, but the air still trembled. I raised the camera, half smiling at my own reflection. Then the bulb exploded. Darkness swallowed the room, and instinct made me press the shutter. Click. For a second, I thought I saw a flash. Not white, but red, like the inside of an eyelid when you stare at the sun. I remember the metallic taste of air, the faint hiss of the film winding itself. Then silence. When I turned on the emergency lamp, my hands were shaking. The mirror was fogged, but through it, I swore I saw someone standing behind me, a silhouette taller than my own. When I spun around, there was nothing, only the hum of the old fridge and the Leica on the table, its lens glistening like a wet eye. I developed the film before dawn. Only one frame came out clear, my face, and behind me a blur, a figure. His mouth was open. At first, I thought it was a trick of double exposure. But the more I stared, the more it looked alive. I could almost hear it breathe. By sunrise, I'd torn the negative apart and thrown the pieces into the sink. But when I came back from a shower, they'd reassembled themselves on the wet metal, forming a perfect rectangle. And in the center, a new photo. Not me this time, not the room, just the old man from the market, eyes wide open, dead. Episode 2. Negative exposure. They say every photograph captures a memory, but the one I took that night, it remembered me. I didn't sleep after the old man's face appeared on that print. How could I? The image stared at me from the sink, water rippling over it like it was still alive. By dawn, I told myself it was impossible. Some kind of chemical error. Maybe I'd mixed the developer too hot. Maybe I was losing it. Still, I couldn't throw the photo away. I dried it, framed it, and told myself it was proof of nothing. Just an accident. But accidents don't bleed. By afternoon, I heard the news. A man had died overnight in his shop at the flea market. Heart attack, they said. The photo seller. Same face, same eyes, wide open, as if staring at the flash that wasn't supposed to exist. My stomach dropped. My mind started stitching coincidences together. Ugly, perfect stitches that fit too well. What if the camera hadn't captured him? What if it had taken him? I should have smashed the damn thing. But when I looked at it sitting on my desk, black and silent, I felt drawn, like it knew I was thinking about it, like it was listening. I decided to test it. One roll, one subject. My neighbor, Lily, was a dancer, light, kind, the type of person who believed every photo could tell a story. I told her I was experimenting with old film stock, nothing serious. She smiled, posed by the window, and laughed when I asked her not to blink. The shutter clicked 3 times. Each click sounded deeper, heavier, like footsteps descending into the earth. When I developed the film later that night, I froze. In every shot, Lily was perfect, except behind her, in the shadows, there was that shape. The same outline as before. Only this time, it was closer. In the last frame, its hand was resting gently on her shoulder. The next morning, she didn't answer my texts, or her door. By evening, There were sirens in the hallway. Her roommate found her collapsed beside the window. No wounds, no struggle, just her eyes wide open, like the old man's. I went back to my studio, heart breaking in slow motion. The Leica sat on the table where I'd left it, the lens cap off, as if it had been waiting for me. I swear I heard a whisper then, not in the air but inside my head, a sound like film winding. Take more. That's how you'll learn the truth. I reached for the camera with trembling hands. The metal felt warm, almost alive. I stared through the viewfinder into the darkness of my room, and for a moment, I thought I saw eyes staring back. That's when I realized I wasn't the one taking the pictures anymore. I was the one being framed. Episode 3, The Face in the Fixer Tray. There's a silence that only darkrooms know. The kind that hums like a heartbeat under red light, where every breath feels recorded. I'd been avoiding the camera for 3 days after Lily's death, but avoidance doesn't erase temptation. It only makes it hungrier. I kept telling myself I needed answers, proof, something rational. So I loaded one last roll and promised this would be the final experiment. I would photograph the empty room. No subjects, no faces, just light, shadow, and silence. When the shutter clicked, it sounded different this time, like an inhale. I swear the air moved toward the camera, as if the room itself had exhaled through the lens. I froze, pulse hammering, waiting for that whisper again. But the silence was complete, the kind that hums in your teeth. Hours later, under the red glow of my darkroom, I began developing the film. The smell of chemicals filled the space. Acid, memory, and something faintly sweet, like burnt sugar. The negatives started to appear. The chair, the wall, the outline of my tripod. Then, in the fixer tray, a shape surfaced. A face. Not Lily's. Not the old man's. Mine. Only it wasn't looking at the camera, it was looking past it. Eyes wide, jaw half open, as if my reflection had been caught mid-warning. I blinked and leaned closer. The image rippled on the surface of the liquid, and in that blur, the mouth in the photo moved. Smiled. The room suddenly felt smaller, tighter. I stepped back, but the light bulb above me flickered and dimmed to a pulse, on-off, on each beat matching my heart. When I looked again, the face in the tray wasn't just smiling anymore. It was whispering. No sound, just motion. Lips forming a single word over and over. Stay. The developer tray trembled. Drops of solution splashed onto my hands, cold and sharp. But when I looked down, my skin had gone pale, bleached, as if the chemical had drained color straight from my veins. I stumbled to the sink, scrubbing, gasping. Then the mirror above the sink clouded over with steam. My reflection appeared, but it wasn't mirroring me. It lifted the camera first. Slowly, calmly, like it was waiting for me to catch up. And then it pressed the shutter. Click. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The sound echoed through the room even though no camera in my hands had moved. When the light steadied again, the fixer tray was empty. No photo, no face, no evidence that anything had been there. But the Leica, sitting on the counter, had a new roll loaded. I hadn't touched it, and when I opened the film door, there were prints already inside. Fresh, warm. Every frame showed me, standing in the darkroom, frozen mid-fear, and behind me, something watching. Episode 4, The Aperture of Guilt. There's a certain peace that comes after you've seen death through a lens. It's not acceptance, it's paralysis. A frozen understanding that life is fragile enough to fit in a single frame. After Lily's funeral, I couldn't look at cameras without feeling sick. But guilt is a strange parasite. It whispers in the voice of reason. Told me to keep shooting. Document it, it said. Prove it's not real. Prove you're not losing your mind. So I did. I began photographing grief itself. Funerals, hospital corridors, candles burning down to wax ghosts. I told people I was working on a project called The Anatomy of Farewell. They believed me. They even thanked me. Every time I pressed the shutter, that same warmth pulsed through the camera. The Leica had become a heartbeat in my hands, alive, patient, waiting. And each time I developed the film, I saw the same terrible pattern. In every photo, somewhere in the background, someone's reflection, a shadow, a smear of movement where no one had stood. Sometimes a hand resting on a shoulder, sometimes eyes glinting through glass. And then, the person closest to that blur would die within days. At first, I thought I was just noticing coincidence. Then came the night I photographed a dying man named Mr. Harrow in a hospice ward. He was fading fast, eyes half open, a peaceful kind of surrender. I took one picture, one respectful frame. The next day, I returned to give the family the prints. But when I developed the film, there was something new. Mr. Harrow's hand was raised in the photo. But when I'd taken it, it had been limp, and his mouth was open, whispering something my mind refused to read. I stared at the image until my vision blurred. Then I saw it behind him near the reflection in the forebag. A face. The same one from the fixer tray. My own. That night, the hospice nurse called me. She said Mr. Harrow had died at dawn. But before he went, he said something strange. He whispered, "Tell the man with the camera, thank you." I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just sat there, surrounded by prints that felt more like gravestones than memories. My studio reeked of developer and dread. The negatives seemed to hum when I walked past them, as if they were alive with static breath. When I tried to destroy them, the paper bled through my fingers. Red streaks that weren't ink or emulsion. I washed my hands until they burned, but the stains stayed. Now, when I pick up the Leica, I can feel it watching me back. It doesn't ask anymore. It expects. Every photo I take is a confession, and the camera is my priest. They say guilt fades with time, but I think mine develops in the dark. Episode 5, The Light That Never Fades. I never wanted fame. I only wanted proof. Proof that what I'd captured was real, or that I was insane. Either answer would have been a kind of mercy. But mercy doesn't come for people like me. It comes for the ones I photograph. It was a man named Vincent Lane who found me. A gallery owner, elegant, persuasive, the kind of man who could sell nightmares as art. He'd seen my portfolio by accident, he claimed. Said my work was raw, transcendental, like death learning how to pose. I almost laughed, but he offered an exhibition. He said people would pay to see what I'd seen. So I agreed. The night of the opening, the city felt colder than usual. The gallery lights were pure white, sharp enough to make the air hum. My photos lined the walls. 21 portraits of grief, each one black and white, each one breathing. I could feel it. They weren't still. The guests whispered words like genius, morbid, profound. Glasses clinked. Someone cried in front of Lily's portrait. Another man stared too long at the shot of the old market owner. And everywhere I turned, I felt eyes that weren't in the room, eyes from within the frames. Vincent leaned close to me, smiling. "You've captured eternity, Eliot," he said. "Your art will never fade." Then the power went out. 1 second, laughter. The next, a vacuum. The room plunged into total dark except for the faint red of the exit sign and the photographs. They glowed, softly like candles. The figures inside them began to move, slowly, as if waking from sleep. Their faces shifted, eyes rolling toward the crowd. I heard the first scream when Lily turned her head in the frame and blinked. Someone dropped a glass. Another person shouted for the lights. The hum from the walls grew louder, a static crescendo like hundreds of overlapping whispers. I turned toward the nearest photo, the old man's. His mouth was open now, wider, stretching into a silent howl that made my stomach twist. And then the emergency lights flickered back on. The guests were frozen, pale, trembling. The photographs were still again, except one. Mr. Harrow's print had changed completely. The empty chair in his hospice room now held Vincent. The same suit, the same slick grin. Only this version of him had hollow eyes, black, bottomless, devouring light. Vincent didn't move for a moment. Then, in real life, he laughed awkwardly. "Remarkable trick," he said, trying to sound calm. But his voice cracked. He excused himself, went to the restroom, and never came back. The police found him the next morning. Heart failure, they said. No sign of struggle. When I went to retrieve the prints from the gallery, the curator handed me one that no one remembered seeing before. A new photo. It showed me standing in the center of the gallery, camera in hand, eyes glowing white, and scrawled in the corner, in chemical residue instead of ink, were 4 words. The light never fades. Episode 6. The Portrait Collector. For weeks after the gallery incident, I couldn't bring myself to touch the camera. It sat on my desk like a loaded gun, its lens turned toward the window, drinking the city's dying light. I tried to convince myself it was over, that maybe the curse had burned itself out with Vincent. But curses don't die, they adapt. It began again with whispers, faint at first, like the hum of a power line behind a wall. Only this hum had rhythm, almost language. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wake up to the sound of my shutter clicking by itself. I'd find the Leica pointed at my bed, a new frame of film loaded, the air still trembling from its breath. When I finally developed those rolls, she appeared for the first time. In every photo between reflections behind shadows, there she was, a woman, never in full focus. Sometimes only her shoulder, her hair, her hand resting on the edge of the frame as though she were leaning into the picture from somewhere else. She wasn't like the others. She didn't fade when I looked longer. She stared back. Her presence became predictable. The moment I held the camera, I could feel her watching through the glass. That warmth under the shutter button returned, but it wasn't menacing anymore. It was tender, inviting, almost intimate. And then one night she spoke. I was developing a portrait of a child from a memorial shoot. The red light flickered, and through the chemical fog, her voice slipped into the room, soft, close to my ear. "Keep shooting, Eliot," she whispered. "Each photo brings me closer." I dropped the tray. The sound echoed like a gunshot. My heart pounded as I turned, but the room was empty. Only the Leica, sitting in the corner, glimmering faintly under the crimson light. When I looked back at the developing image, I froze. The photo wasn't of the child anymore. It was her. A woman in a black dress, face half-lit, eyes like broken glass. She was smiling, no posing. Her head tilted just so, the way only practiced models do. And at the bottom of the photo, words had etched themselves into the emulsion. "Find me in the mirror." I turned toward the mirror above the sink. For a heartbeat, nothing. Just my reflection, hollow-eyed, exhausted. Then, behind my shoulder, a movement, a shimmer. She was there, standing in the darkroom's corner, pale hands clasped in front of her chest like a prayer. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of jasmine and decay. Her eyes met mine through the glass, and I couldn't move. I raised the camera without thinking. Click. The flash exploded white. When my vision cleared, she was gone. But when I developed that frame, she was standing closer. Her lips slightly parted, as if she were about to speak again. Now, every time I sleep, I dream of her walking through my photographs, touching the faces of the dead, whispering their names, collecting them like a curator arranging her favorite gallery. And every morning, I find a new print drying in my darkroom. Images I didn't take. Her face in all of them. Closer, smiling, waiting. I used to photograph strangers. Now I think she's teaching me to photograph ghosts. Episode 7, ISO 666. The first time I saw the number, it wasn't on the camera. It was scratched into my wall. 3 digits, crude, uneven, burned into the paint just above my desk. 666. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. Sleep deprivation can do that. But when I touched the marks, the paint was warm, almost soft, like skin. That same night, the Leica began to hum. A low vibration through the table, through my bones. The lens turned toward me on its own, and I swear I heard the faint click of the dial turning. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then it stopped. I lifted it, my breath catching. There, where ISO 100 should have been, a new setting had appeared, engraved faintly in the metal. ISO 666. I shouldn't have touched it, but curiosity has a cruel voice. It always sounds like reason. I turned the dial. The hum deepened. The viewfinder darkened until I could see almost nothing, except movement. Through that glass, the room looked different. Shadows pulsed like veins. The walls breathed in slow rhythm. And when I aimed it at the mirror, the woman was there again, clearer now, standing behind me. Her whisper brushed the back of my neck. "Now you can see what death feels." The flash went off before I could stop it. The world blinked red. I dropped the camera, gasping. The smell of burned ozone filled the air, sharp and metallic. When I looked at my hands, they were trembling, pale as paper. I felt drained, hollowed, like the photo had taken more than light. When I developed the image, I understood. It wasn't a normal photograph. It was a moment, frozen emotion, the raw pulse of fear, pain, and surrender, all layered into one distorted scream of color and shadow. I could feel the terror bleeding from it, seeping into me like smoke. And in the background, faint but unmistakable, was the shape of a man I'd seen earlier that day, a stranger walking his dog outside my building. He wasn't there when I took the picture, but now his face was twisted in agony, his eyes wide with the same impossible recognition I'd seen in Lily's photo. The next morning, I heard sirens. He died of a sudden aneurysm. Every image I took at ISO 666 carried that same weight, each subject captured at the brink of something final. Their smiles flickered with unseen pain. Their eyes reflected moments they hadn't lived yet. It wasn't photography anymore. It was harvesting. I stopped eating, stopped leaving the apartment. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photos blinking in the dark, their faces shifting, gasping for air that didn't exist. And her, always her, standing at the edge of the frame, watching me fade a little more with every shot. Last night, I caught my reflection again. My pupils were gone, just two black holes swallowing the light. And on the wall behind me, etched in perfect symmetry, the numbers appeared again. 666. Below them, for new words in dripping emulsion. Now you're one of us. Every artist gives a piece of himself to his work. I just didn't know mine would be my soul. Episode 8. Through the glass darkly. I used to believe mirrors were honest. Now I know they lie with terrifying precision. It started small, my reflection hesitating a heartbeat too long after I moved. I'd raise my hand, and it would follow, but slower, like it was thinking about it, testing me. I blamed exhaustion, isolation, the endless nights developing cursed film in my red-lit coffin of a darkroom. But when your own reflection starts to blink out of sync, you can't explain that away. The camera sat by the mirror now like it belonged there. I couldn't remember putting it there, but it felt right. Every night, I'd catch its lens faintly glowing in the dark, pulsing, breathing, like a patient waiting for permission to die. And then came the sound, a soft mechanical click, steady and patient, echoing inside the mirror's silver surface. I leaned closer, heart pounding. That's when I saw it, me, but not quite. My reflection's eyes were darker, deeper, hungry. It smiled before I did. I whispered, "Who are you?" And my reflection answered, perfectly lip-synced to my voice. "You took their souls, Eliot. Now we'll take yours." The mirror cracked, just slightly, a spiderweb fracture running across my face. I stumbled back. The Leica flashed once, blinding white. When I looked again, the crack was gone. But my reflection had stayed smiling. I tried to destroy it, threw a towel over the mirror, turned the camera toward the wall. But in the dark, I could still hear that soft click every few seconds, like a pulse. When I couldn't stand it anymore, I tore the towel away. The reflection was gone. The mirror showed only the room, empty, silent. Then slowly I stepped into view, but I hadn't moved. My heart froze. The other me stood behind the glass, staring with those black, hollow eyes. He lifted the Leica to his face, motionless except for the slow twist of the focus ring. And then he took the picture. Click. The flash came from inside the mirror this time. My world blinked white. When the light faded, I saw his world, my world, flicker and trade places. He was standing in my apartment now. I was standing behind the glass. I screamed, slammed my fists against the cold surface, but my voice came out muffled, like shouting through a grave. He looked around, adjusted his collar, then turned to face me. "Don't worry," he whispered. "You'll be famous forever." He raised the camera once more, aimed it at the mirror, at me. Another click. The world went dark. When the light returned, he was gone. The apartment was still. Only the mirror remained, cracked down the middle, a faint shadow of my face trapped beneath the surface. And in the corner of the room, the Leica sat on the table, humming softly, waiting. Episode 9, Focal Length of the Dead. You learn strange things about time when you're not sure if you're alive. It stretches, folds, snaps like film left too long in the light. Since the mirror took me, I've existed in something between reflection and reality. My apartment is still here, sort of. The air hums like it's breathing through glass, and every object glows with a sickly shimmer, as if remembering itself. The only thing truly solid is the Leica. It sits on the table, waiting for me like a loyal dog with a secret. I discovered the truth about distance by accident. When I look through the lens now, I don't just see people, I see their time. A faint aura flickers around them, like heat rising off asphalt. The closer I focus, the faster it pulses. The first test was cruel. A man in the street below, smoking, alone, framed perfectly in morning light. I aimed the camera at him, half curious, half desperate for proof that I still had power over something. I adjusted the focus. He coughed, turned the ring tighter. He stumbled. 1 more millimeter, and he dropped the cigarette, clutching his chest. Click. The moment the shutter snapped, his body went still. And when I looked through the viewfinder again, his aura had vanished, replaced by a faint whisper of smoke curling toward the lens. The photo developed itself on the wall behind me. The man's face was peaceful, almost grateful. I felt nothing. That's when I realized the camera didn't just steal life, it measured it. The focal length dictated how long they had left. Far away, days. Close up, seconds. A god's precision, born of glass and guilt. So I began to test it. A woman crossing the street, focused at 10 meters. She tripped that evening, twisted her ankle. A man feeding pigeons, 5 meters. Dead within hours, a heart attack by the fountain. Each frame whispered like a clock winding down. Each click stole a heartbeat I could almost feel echoing in my ribs. But the worst came when I turned the lens on myself. I stood before the cracked mirror, the one that still shimmered faintly with the other me trapped behind it. I focused on my reflection, distant at first, then closer. The aura around me flickered, bright at first, then dim. I could feel my pulse slowing in rhythm with the focus ring. Each twist, a heartbeat fading. Each breath thinner. Then the reflection smiled. He whispered, "Go on. See what happens when you reach 0. My fingers shook. The focus ring stopped at the infinity mark. Click. The flash was silent this time. Just a sigh of air, a ripple across both sides of the mirror. When I opened my eyes, the other me was gone. Only the reflection of the Leica remained, floating in the dark like an open eye. And on the wall behind me, a new photo appeared, developed without chemicals, without hands. It was a picture of my apartment. Empty. No body. No shadow. Just the camera on the table. Waiting. Death isn't an instant. It's a distance. And I've finally learned how to focus it. Episode 10, Exposure Compensation. There's a moment, right before film burns, when the image brightens, like it's fighting to stay alive. That's what the photos did when I tried to destroy them. By then, my apartment had become a mausoleum of faces. Prints lined the walls, stacked on tables, curled along the floor. Hundreds of eyes staring from silver and shadow. Every one of them someone I'd captured. Someone the Leica had taken. And they were breathing. I heard them in the dark. Soft exhales behind the paper. Whispers leaking from the edges of frames. Some nights, I'd wake to find the photos rearranged on the walls, forming patterns I didn't recognize. Circles, spirals, eyes. I couldn't take it anymore. So I gathered them all, the cursed prints, the negatives, the rolls of film still damp from chemicals, and threw them into a metal basin. I doused them with alcohol, struck a match, and watched the fire bloom. First, it was a relief. The faces shriveled, the edges curled inward like dying leaves. The air filled with a chemical hiss and a stench of plastic and rot. I almost laughed until the photos started to scream. The sound wasn't human. It came from inside the flames, high-pitched and layered, like dozens of voices overlapping in agony. The fire turned from orange to deep crimson, and something wet dripped from the basin to the floor. Blood. Thick, black, smoking blood. I stumbled back, choking. The fire guttered out, but the heat didn't fade. When I looked again, the photos were reforming. The ashes slid across the metal, knitting themselves back together. One by one, the images reappeared, clearer, sharper, almost glowing. And the faces, they'd changed. Every one of them was looking at me. My heart hammered as the room pulsed with a dull red glow. I could hear their whispers now, no longer muffled by paper. Why us? Why her? Why did you take it? I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound came from inside my skull. Every voice I'd photographed, every soul I'd stolen. They spoke in unison now, a low chant rising into something almost rhythmic. Give us the light. Give us the light. The Leica began to hum. Its shutter clicked by itself, rapid and hungry, as if feeding on the chaos. I grabbed it, desperate, and hurled it into the fire. The explosion of light was blinding, pure white, no heat, no sound, just silence and an overwhelming sense of presence. When I opened my eyes, the fire was gone. The room was dark again, the basin empty, and on the far wall, the photos were back. Every single one. But this time, they were different. The people in them weren't strangers anymore. They were me. Hundreds of versions. Me sleeping, me screaming, me standing in the doorway staring back at myself. And in the very center, one final print larger than the rest. It showed me holding the camera. Only my body was transparent. And inside my chest, through the faint outline of ribs and lungs, the Leica was glowing like a heart. Then, from somewhere deep inside the paper, my own voice whispered back to me, "You can't destroy what you've become." I thought I was erasing the evidence, but all I did was develop the truth. Episode 11, The Camera Obscura. Every curse begins somewhere. Every evil has an origin, a pulse that started beating long before it found you. After the fire, after the photos came back to life, I realized I needed answers. The Leica wasn't just haunted, it was designed to haunt. So I found someone who might know. Dr. Alden Meyer, a historian of early photographic techniques, lived 3 hours north, in a crumbling Victorian house that smelled of rain and mildew. He was a collector of obsessions, old daguerreotypes, broken lenses, glass negatives. His entire study looked like a mausoleum for light. When I showed him the Leica, his hands trembled. "My God," he whispered, "you shouldn't have this." He turned it over gently, tracing the faint engraving beneath the metal casing, symbols I'd always assumed were serial numbers. Now, under his lamp, they shimmered faintly like dried blood. "It's not a Leica," he said. "It's a replica built by a man named Heinrich Voss in 1892. He was a portraitist, brilliant but obsessed with the idea that a camera could trap more than an image. He believed it could imprison a soul." I laughed, weakly. "You mean like superstition? Old myths about cameras stealing spirits?" Dr. Meyer looked at me, expression hollow. "No, I mean literally." He pulled an old box from his shelf, photographs yellowed to the color of bone. They were all portraits. Men, women, children, each with the same haunted, frozen expression. Behind every face, faintly visible, was a second figure, a shadow caught mid-scream. "These were taken with Voss's prototype," he said. He called it the camera obscura mortis, the death lens. When he realized what it could do, he began selling portraits to the grieving, claiming he could preserve their loved ones forever. But the images changed over time. The people inside them aged. He looked at me then, eyes wet with fear. Voss's apprentices vanished one by one, and when he finally died, His last plate photograph showed himself, standing behind the camera, smiling. The same smile every victim wore in their final frame. I told him about the faces, the bleeding photos, the woman who whispered through the lens. I told him about ISO 666. Dr. Meyer's expression drained of color. He reached for the Leica, trying to cover the lens with a cloth. "Don't let it see me," he muttered. "It remembers." But it was too late. The shutter clicked on its own. Once, soft, almost gentle. Dr. Meyer froze. His pupils dilated. His breath stopped mid-sentence. The cloth slipped from his hand. The photo developed instantly on his wall. His face appeared in perfect focus. Mouth open, eyes wide, staring right at me. And behind him, faint but unmistakable, the woman. The one from my photos. The collector. She was smiling. When I fled the house, I looked back only once. Through the window, Dr. Meyer's silhouette stood perfectly still in front of his bookshelf. Only, the shadows on the walls were gone. The room had flattened, like a photograph pinned to reality. That's when I understood what she'd been telling me all along. The Leica wasn't just a tool, it was a vessel. Every soul it took was stored in the glass. And every time I took a photo, it was growing stronger. Heinrich Voss built it to capture eternity. I think I've finally learned what eternity costs. Episode 12, The Darkroom Confession. They say confession is good for the soul. But what if your soul isn't yours anymore? I started recording this because I can feel it happening. Something pulling at me from the other side of the lens. Every click brings her closer. Every breath I take feels borrowed. I can't tell where I end and the camera begins. The Leica sits on my desk like an altarpiece, its metal shell pulsing with faint heat. I've stopped eating, sleeping. The world outside my window has lost color. Everything is dimmed, drained, like an underexposed photo. The only light left in this apartment comes from the darkroom. That's where I'm sitting now. The red bulb hums overhead. The chemical trays wait, patient as graves. The walls are covered with faces, hundreds of them. The people I took. Their eyes glint when I move, following me like tiny mirrors reflecting my guilt. I keep hearing her voice between the hums of the ventilation fan. "Eliot," she whispers. "Finish the collection." She wants one more photo. I think I finally understand who it's supposed to be. Me. My hands are shaking as I load the final roll of film. The motion feels ritualistic now, sacred. I've done this so many times it's mechanical, open, insert, wind, close. The click of the latch echoes through the darkroom like a heartbeat. I set the timer on the recorder. If anyone ever finds this tape, I want them to know I didn't mean for any of it. I was chasing light, not death. I wanted to capture truth, not eternity. The camera hums louder, almost eager. I raise it toward the mirror. My reflection stares back. Pale, gaunt, eyes ringed with shadows that look more like bruises. The mirror itself trembles faintly, like it's breathing. Behind my reflection, she stands. The woman in black, the collector. Her hand rests on my shoulder through the glass, and I can feel the cold seep through my skin. I whisper, "Is this what you want?" She smiles. "It's what you wanted, Eliot. To be remembered." The shutter button feels like ice under my finger. I press it. Click. The flash is blinding. For a second, I see nothing but white, a white so pure it feels holy. Then everything fades to black. When I open my eyes, the Leica is on the floor. The recorder still runs, its red light blinking. But the chair in front of the mirror is empty. No me, just the camera humming softly. I look up at the mirror and there I am, smiling, frozen inside the glass, the Leica glowing faintly in my hands. The woman stands beside me now, whispering something I can almost understand. On the tape, my voice begins to distort, fading under a soft, mechanical rhythm. Click, 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 each one quieter than the last. Then silence. When the darkroom door finally swings open, days, weeks, maybe years later, they'll find only one photograph pinned to the wall, a self-portrait, perfectly exposed, signed in developer streaks that spell my name, Eliot Gray. And beneath it, scrawled in red light, The words, "Every confession deserves an audience." The shutter closed, but I think the story's still developing. Episode 13, The Exhibition That Vanished. They told me Eliot Gray disappeared 5 years ago, but disappearances leave residue, and sometimes that residue whispers. I host Grave Frequency, a podcast about haunted art and unsolved creative tragedies. I'd read about Eliot in a dusty photography journal, The Man Who Photographed Death. The article called his final work The Darkroom Confession, but no one had ever seen the negatives. No police report, no obituary, nothing but silence and an empty lease. So when a tip came in from an anonymous email, "If you want to find Eliot, follow the light that doesn't fade," I packed my recorder and drove to the address. His building was a tomb. Dust coated the windows like frost, and the hallway smelled of chemicals and wet paper. I found the door half open, hinges stiff with rust. Inside, the air was heavy, dense, metallic. Felt like walking into someone's lungs. The darkroom was exactly as he'd left it. Red bulb humming. Trays dried with stains the color of old blood. The Leica on the floor, its lens cracked but still gleaming faintly. I pressed record. This is Claire Rowan, Grave Frequency, Episode 73, The Photographer Who Shot Souls. Every sound echoed, the drip of a pipe, the creak of the floor. I started describing the scene for the listeners when something caught my eye. A single photograph pinned to the wall above the desk. A self-portrait. Eliot, sitting in this very room, smiling faintly. His reflection in the mirror behind him seemed wrong. The reflection wasn't smiling. It was staring at me. I stepped closer, raising my flashlight. That's when the air changed. The beam flickered, shadows rippling across the walls. I heard the faintest click, soft and patient, like a shutter being released. But the camera hadn't moved. I tried to rationalize it, old house noises, maybe a draft. Then I noticed a stack of negatives on the table, still glossy, untouched by time. My hands shook as I held them to the light. The first few were ordinary enough, portraits, faces blurred in motion. But then, my heart stopped. One frame showed this room exactly as I stood in it now. The Leica, the photo on the wall, the scattered rolls of film, everything in perfect detail. And in the center of the image, me. My hair, my coat, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark. But my face wasn't mine. The eyes were hollow. The mouth stretched in a silent, manic grin that wasn't human. The Leica clicked again. I dropped the negatives. The flashlight sputtered out, plunging me into red light. In the faint hum of the bulb, I could hear a whisper threading through the air, rising from the film trays, from the photographs, from the walls themselves. Every confession deserves an audience. Something brushed my shoulder. I spun, heart slamming, but no one was there. Only the cracked mirror, fogged over with a shape that looked like a hand pressed against the glass. My hand, from the inside. The recorder crackled, picking up the sound of my breath. Then, click. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember the stairs. I only know that when I got back to my car, the passenger seat was covered in wet photo paper. And when I looked down, one of them was still developing. My own face staring up at me, eyes open, mouth whispering a name. Eliot. I came to find his story, but I think his story just found me. Episode 14, Still Life. Do you know what it feels like to be seen but not alive? To exist only as light, trapped between the shutter and the dark? I do now. The first thing I lost was time. Seconds don't move here, they stretch, loop, dissolve. The second thing I lost was sound. All that's left is the soft, rhythmic click that marks every new life the Leica steals. That's how I know I'm still working, still collecting. Because yes, I'm inside it now. Inside the glass. When Claire, the woman from the podcast, picked up the camera, I felt the vibration before she even touched it. Her fingers brushed the lens, and her pulse flooded through me. A shiver of living warmth I hadn't felt in what might be years. She didn't know it, but her curiosity unlocked the shutter again. Through her, I can see. Every time she lifts the Leica to her eye, the world sharpens around her. I see through her pupils, feel her heartbeat tremble against the metal. She thinks she's documenting history. She doesn't realize she's feeding it. The collector, the woman in black, hovers close. She moves through reflections, her face pressed against the glass from my side. I can feel her breath sliding over the lens like fog. "Keep shooting," she tells me. Every frame is another door, and she's right. Each photograph opens something. A thin slit between the living and the still. I see them all. The children playing in alleys, the lovers in moonlit parks, the strangers crossing empty streets. Their movements blur, slow, then freeze as the shutter snaps. For one heartbeat, they join me here, in the frozen light. Most scream, some pray, but a few just stare, understanding too late that memory is a kind of death. Claire's beginning to hear us. I whisper when she sleeps, so do the others. She wakes up drenched in sweat, muttering about breathing walls and blinking pictures. The Leica never leaves her side. She says she's close to finishing the story. She doesn't realize she is the story now. Last night, she placed the camera in front of a mirror, the same ritual I performed before the end. "If you're real," she said, "show me." The mirror fogged over instantly. Her reflection looked different. Eyes darker, mouth trembling. And in that reflection, I moved first. For the first time since my death, I saw her see me. The terror on her face was exquisite, pure, unfiltered emotion. I almost remembered what it felt like to breathe. Then she took the picture. Click. The flash devoured the room. When the light cleared, she was gone. Only the Leica remained, humming faintly, smoke rising from its casing. I can feel her now. Inside the lens with me, another portrait in the gallery of the still. We wait together for the next hand, the next curious soul, the next confession to capture. They call it still life because the body stops moving, but the soul never does. Episode 15, The Lens Remembers. The listing appeared at 3:03 a.m. Vintage Leica, condition. Haunted. I thought it was a joke. I collect old cameras, especially those with stories, war relics, ghost lore curiosities, anything cursed enough to feel special. But this one called to me. The seller's description was short, typed in shaking grammar. Do not use flash. Do not photograph mirrors. It remembers. I hit buy now without thinking. Some things feel destined. When the package arrived, the box was damp, the tape yellowed like skin. Inside lay the camera, heavy, cold, beautiful in a predatory way. The lens had hairline cracks like veins, and when I tilted it toward the light, it reflected not my face, but something behind me. A woman in black. I laughed nervously, blaming the lighting. But when I turned around, nothing. That night, I tested it anyway. Of course I did. I set the Leica on my tripod, aimed it at my study, and pressed the shutter. The click was softer than I expected, more like a sigh. The first photo developed pale and sickly, the shadows bleeding too dark. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. Faint faces, half-formed, pressed into the background. Dozens of them, and behind them all, two main figures. A man, expression frozen in mid-scream, and a woman, smiling beside him, one hand on the lens. I should have stopped there, but I didn't. Something in that image felt familiar, like déjà vu from a life I'd never lived. I loaded another roll and kept shooting my reflection, the corners of the room, the window pane. Each shot heavier, slower, as if the camera was feeding. At midnight, the power flickered. The air grew thick. The Leica began to hum, low and mechanical, almost like a heartbeat. And then the photos started changing themselves. Prints I hadn't developed yet began to appear across the table, wet and breathing. The faces inside them were no longer still. They twitched, blinked, turned their heads toward me. One of them, a man with hollow eyes, moved his lips until I realized he was mouthing words. "Help us!" I stumbled back, knocking over the tripod. The Leica hit the floor, the lens cracking wider. But it didn't break. It laughed. A whisper threaded through the static in my ears, echoing from the shadows. Every photograph is a memory, and every memory wants to live. The faces on the prints began to twist, pressing outward as if pushing through the paper. Their outlines stretched, tearing the emulsion, fingers clawing for air. I ran to burn them, but the lighter wouldn't spark. The air shimmered red, and then, the man from the photo stepped out of the darkness. Eliot Gray. His eyes were hollow, his voice a whisper of static. "It remembers everything," he said. "Even you." The Leica lifted from the ground by itself, its lens turning toward me, searching, focusing. I couldn't move. My pulse matched the shutter's rhythm. Click. The flash swallowed the room. Now I understand what the seller meant. The Leica doesn't take photos anymore. It restores them, reclaims every soul it's ever touched, every moment it's ever stolen. And in the newest print drying on my wall, I can see myself, standing behind the camera, smiling, eyes white, mouth whispering, "Say cheese." Memories never die. They just wait for the right aperture to open again. Episode 16. The Bride Who Never Blinked. Weddings are supposed to be about beginnings, but that day I photographed an ending. The ceremony was in a sunlit chapel on the edge of the city. Flowers, laughter, a string quartet playing something soft and forgettable. The bride, Isla Marin, was radiant. She glowed in that way only people on borrowed time do. I'd been hired last minute, replacing a colleague who'd fallen ill. The groom, polite but distracted, mentioned the original photographer, refused to shoot after seeing the camera. I thought it was superstition, the kind of bad luck paranoia that floats around wedding halls. Then I saw it, the camera waiting for me in the equipment case. A vintage Leica, heavy, familiar. I didn't remember packing it. Still, I couldn't resist. Something about the weight of it in my hands felt right. Perfect balance, perfect focus. I told myself I'd use it just for a few test shots to honor the old ways. The first photo was flawless. Too flawless. The bride stood by a window, light streaming through lace, veil caught in a slow-motion flutter. But her eyes were open in every frame, wide, fixed, unblinking. Even when I knew she'd blinked in real life. I tried again. Group shots, laughter, dancing. Every person moved naturally except Isla. Her gaze never shifted. Even in photos taken from behind, her face turned slightly, impossibly, toward the lens. By the reception, I'd started shaking. The Leica hummed faintly against my palm, the metal warm, almost alive. When I looked through the viewfinder, I saw not just faces, but faint shadows standing behind each guest, pale outlines breathing just out of reach. Still, I kept shooting. The compulsion was stronger than fear. Then, during the couple's first dance, the music cut out. The air changed thick, electric, like the pause before lightning. Everyone looked around, confused, but Isla kept swaying, her smile fixed, her eyes locked on me. "Take one more," she whispered, but her lips didn't move. I lifted the camera. Through the lens, the room was gone. Only darkness remained, endless and deep. In it, hundreds of faces floated, each one whispering in silent rhythm. Eliot's among them, the woman in black behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder. Click. The flash blinded everyone. Gasps rippled through the crowd. When the light faded, Isla was gone. Her veil drifted gently to the floor. The guests screamed, searched, wept, but no one could find her. The groom collapsed, repeating her name. The police called it a disappearance. But I know better, because when I developed the film that night, she was there. Every frame. Isla in her wedding dress, eyes open, staring straight through the image. Only now she wasn't standing by a window. She was standing beside me, and in the reflection on the Leica's glass, I could see her hand resting on my shoulder, pale fingers pressing against my pulse. The last thing I remember before blacking out was her whisper, soft and certain, "Smile, Adrian. Forever looks better when you don't blink." When I woke, the Leica was gone, but a single print lay drying beside me. My own portrait, perfectly framed, eyes wide open, unblinking. I thought I was capturing her wedding day. Turns out she captured mine. Episode 17, Overexposed. It's strange how quickly obsession feels like purpose. You tell yourself you're chasing perfection, light, emotion, art, but what you're really chasing is a reflection that looks back. After Isla vanished, I told myself I'd stop. I even tried to throw the Leica into the river, but it came back. Not figuratively, literally. 3 days later, it was sitting on my desk, dry, polished, humming softly, like it had never touched water. Inside, a new roll of film. I hadn't loaded it. The first photo developed itself overnight. It showed me asleep, mouth open, camera in hand. The exposure was immaculate. Too immaculate. There was something in the shadows behind me. A faint outline, like wings made of smoke. When I looked closer, the paper was warm. The image seemed to breathe. That's when I started chasing Eliot Gray. I read every article, every transcript, every ghost forum rumor. I studied his compositions, his framing, his unnatural light, his ghost tones. They called it the eerie silver bleed between life and death that no one could replicate. But I could. The Leica showed me how. Every time I shot, I saw more. Not just faces, but memories burning into the negatives. Fleeting moments that shouldn't exist. Lovers whispering in graveyards. Children laughing in burned-out schools. Soldiers blinking awake in photographs a century old. Each roll grew heavier to hold. The air thickened when I pressed the shutter, as though something was pushing back from the other side of the lens. Then reality began to fracture. At first, it was subtle. My reflection would lag when I passed mirrors. The photos hanging on my wall shifted slightly when I wasn't looking. A cup would appear somewhere I hadn't placed it. But soon the light itself began to change. It bent around the Leica like gravity. Colors bled from walls, pooling in corners, draining into the lens. When I looked through the viewfinder, the world shimmered like molten glass. And the whispers returned. Eliot's voice, soft, familiar, echoing in static. "You're doing well, Adrian. You're almost ready." Ready for what, I didn't know. But I couldn't stop. I shot until my fingers cramped. Until my eyes watered from flash burns. I didn't eat, didn't sleep. The camera pulsed like a living organ. I felt it sinking with my heartbeat, drawing each pulse into its shutter. Then came the night the world finally overexposed. I aimed the Leica at the mirror, craving the perfect shot, the one Eliot never finished. The collector stood behind me, veiled in darkness. Her voice curled like smoke. "One more. Capture the light that burns." Click. The flash tore the room apart. For a heartbeat, everything existed at once. The living, the dead, the reflections trapped between them. I saw Eliot, Claire, Isla, Dr. Meyer, all standing behind me, their mouths open in silent confession, their faces blurred, stretched, then fused into light. When the brightness faded, I was alone. The Leica lay on the floor, lens cracked, leaking a faint silver glow. And on the wall behind me, a new photograph had appeared, massive, seamless, perfect. It was the entire room captured mid-flash. Every object rendered in crystalline detail. Except me. I wasn't in it. Now, I don't cast reflections anymore. The world looks washed out, pale, unreal. People's faces blur when they pass me, like I'm already part of the film. The Leica hums faintly in my chest when I breathe. I think it's inside me now. I used to shoot photographs. Now the light shoots through me. Eliot wanted to capture souls. I think I've become the exposure itself. Episode 18. Depth of field. Some cases don't begin with a body. They begin with a photograph. I first saw the Leica listed as evidence item 473B in the veil case, the wedding photographer who vanished in a burst of light, leaving behind a single photo of an empty room. The image itself shouldn't have been remarkable, but when the technicians enhanced the shadows, there were faces in the grain. Dozens, maybe hundreds, and one of them was mine. That was impossible, of course. I'd never met Vale. I'd never been photographed with that camera. Yet there I was, standing in the corner of a stranger's apartment, eyes wide, lips parted as if whispering something I couldn't remember saying. I told myself it was coincidence. Pareidolia, the human brain finding meaning in static. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the photo was watching me. 2 nights later, the Leica arrived on my desk. No chain of custody, no signature, just a plain evidence bag. Inside, the camera's metal casing felt warm, almost feverish, and when I turned it over, faint fingerprints glowed beneath the surface. Overlapping, layered, hundreds deep. I caught myself staring into the lens. It was darker than black, like looking down a well that had no bottom. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a flicker of light inside the glass. Then it clicked. The shutter released on its own. No flash, no sound, but that single, perfect click. I looked around the room, no one there. My reflection in the window blinked a second later than I did. I decided to send the Leica to forensics the next morning, but the file system crashed that night. All the photos attached to Vale's case corrupted into static. Every one except the last. That one had changed. The empty room now contained a new figure. Someone standing by the window, facing away. Me. The next day, I drove to the evidence lockup myself. The guard on duty swore I'd already been there. "You signed for the camera this morning," he said. "Said you needed it for field analysis." My name was on the form, my handwriting, but I hadn't been there. That night, I woke to the sound of my apartment door opening. The Leica sat on my nightstand, its shutter faintly twitching, as if breathing in its sleep. I whispered, "What do you want from me?" The answer came from everywhere at once. A dozen voices, layered in the dark. To focus. The air shimmered. My walls dissolved into light. The room bent around me, stretching, distorting, until I stood in a vast field of silver fog. Every direction shimmered with movement. Figures frozen mid-expression, reaching out, whispering names. Eliot, Claire, Isla, Adrian. And then, through the haze, I saw myself. 100 versions, each one older, colder, emptier. Each one holding a Leica, each one lifting it toward me. Click, the flash ripped through the void. I woke on the floor of my apartment. Morning sunlight poured through the blinds, but it felt artificial. Too bright, too still. The Leica was gone. In its place, a single photo. It showed my living room exactly as it was, except for one detail. On the couch, someone sat facing away holding a camera. My camera. And at the bottom, etched in faint silver letters, the words, "Focus determines what survives. The deeper the field, the less you know which side you're standing on." Episode 19, The Shutter Falls. There's a sound that keeps replaying in my head. A single, perfect click. It's been 3 days since the photograph appeared on my couch. 3 days since the world began to feel slightly overexposed. The air itself flickers sometimes, like a dying projector. When I move too quickly, my vision trails behind me, leaving streaks of light, like the universe forgot to refresh. I don't sleep anymore. The Leica doesn't let me. It's back on my desk, pristine, untouched, humming faintly under its own breath. Every few hours, it shifts position, sometimes upright, sometimes tilted toward the window, always watching. I've stopped questioning how. Some answers don't belong to the living. Last night, I heard voices from the negatives. Faint, layered, distant, like a choir singing through static. I followed the sound to my evidence board. Every photograph I'd collected during the investigation had changed. The faces were moving, not alive, not dead, just becoming. Eliot Gray, Claire Rowan, Dr. Meyer, Isla Marin, Adrian Vale, all of them flickering between existence and memory. Their mouths formed words I couldn't hear until the hum of the Leica deepened into a voice. Eliot's voice. "Open the aperture, Mara." The shutters falling. The light in the room dimmed, colors draining like spilled ink. The Leica began to rise, hovering just above the desk, lens pointed directly at me. The air thickened, shimmering with a pulse like heat from a furnace. Then came the whispers, not from one direction, from everywhere. The photos, the mirrors, the metal surfaces, all murmuring in unison. "We are the exposures. We remember the flash. It's time to finish the frame." The Leica's shutter began cycling on its own, faster and faster, each click releasing a burst of white light that cracked reality open a little wider. With every flash, another soul stepped out of its photograph. Eliot appeared first, half-transparent, eyes glowing faint silver. Behind him came Claire, clutching her recorder like a cross. Then Isla, still in her wedding gown, her veil drifting through the air like smoke. Adrian followed, his hands trembling, face blistered by invisible light. They surrounded me, their voices overlapping. "You took the photo," Eliot said softly. "Now you finish it." I tried to back away, but the floor beneath me had turned reflective, liquid glass stretching infinitely in every direction. My reflection stared back, terrified, holding a camera I hadn't realized was in my hands. The Leica, the real one, or maybe it had always been part of me. The ghosts closed in, merging with their reflections, bleeding into the mirrored ground until I couldn't tell who was real anymore. Eliot smiled sadly. "The shutter falls for everyone, detective. But you get to choose which side of the glass you stand on." The air trembled. The final click echoed through eternity. White silence. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in a gallery. The walls stretched endlessly, covered in photographs that breathed and shimmered. Each one a life, each one a confession. And there, at the center, mounted in gold, hung a new frame. It was me, Detective Mara Quinn, seated at her desk, camera in hand, staring through the lens with eyes that reflected nothing. Beneath the photo, a small brass plaque read, "The shutter falls, exhibition complete." The lights dimmed, the whispers faded, and then I felt it, faint, mechanical, steady, the heartbeat of the Leica, inside my chest. When the shutter falls, light dies, and memory begins. The photograph isn't what's captured, it's what survives. Episode 20. The photograph that breathed. You find it on a quiet street you've never walked before. The kind of street that feels like it only exists for a few minutes a day, between dreams and waking. Rain drizzles from a colorless sky, turning the pavement into a mirror. You're just looking for shelter, but something stops you. A pawn shop, narrow and dim, its sign flickering half dead. Inside the dusty window, amid cracked clocks and forgotten jewelry, sits a camera. Old, black, gleaming faintly through the grime. A Leica. You lean closer and for a second you think it moves. Just a shift, an adjustment of its lens, as if it's looking back. The tag beneath it reads, "Vintage Leica. Condition. Perfect. $6.66. You laugh nervously. The number feels like a bad joke, but curiosity has teeth. You step inside. The bell above the door doesn't ring. The shop smells of dust and static. Shelves crowd the narrow aisles, stacked with objects that seem to hum when you pass. Behind the counter, no one. Just the faint sound of dripping water somewhere deep within. The Leica sits under a single hanging bulb. The light above it flickers, not randomly, but in rhythm, like breathing. You lift it. The metal is warm against your palms, pulsing faintly, like a second heartbeat. The lens is cracked, yet impossibly clear. You bring it close, peering into the glass, and your reflection wavers. You see movement behind you, figures. A man with hollow eyes, Eliot Gray. A woman holding a recorder, Claire Rowan. A bride with unblinking eyes, Isla Marin. A photographer burned by light, Adrian Vale. A detective clutching her badge, Mara Quinn. They stand just outside your reflection, motionless, faces pale as undeveloped film. You spin around. Nothing. Just the faint hum of the light bulb. When you look back, the glass no longer shows the shop. It shows a room, dark, lined with photos that move when you blink. A darkroom. And in that room, you're standing there, holding the Leica. A voice whispers from behind the lens. Soft, familiar. Every voice that's ever spoken through it, layered into one. Every story ends with a witness. You freeze. The shutter moves on its own. Click. The flash blinds you, pure white, clean, final. When the light fades, you're standing outside again. The shop is gone. Just an empty lot glistening with rain. In your hands, you're holding a photograph. It's perfect, crisp, A pawnshop interior, bathed in red light. And in the center of the image, you stand behind the counter, eyes wide, smiling faintly. On the back of the photo, written in faded ink, the photograph that breathed, exhibit open daily. You feel warmth spread through your chest. A slow, steady pulse. The faint hum of a shutter. You try to drop the photo, but your fingers won't let go. The paper trembles, curling at the edges. You swear it exhales. And somewhere, faintly, inside the glass of the photo, a whisper breathes your name. They say cameras capture moments, but some moments never let go. Look closely at the lens next time you take a picture. If it blinks, it's already taken you.
Epilogue, the negative that never faded. They closed the gallery a month after the last photograph appeared. No one could explain how it got there. A final image hung in the center of the room overnight and signed, "Undeclared, unclaimed." It showed a street glistening with rain, a pawnshop window, and a single figure standing outside, holding a camera. The plaque beneath it read only one word: "You." Visitors said the photo changed when no one was looking. Some swore the figure inside the image moved. Others claimed it breathed, condensation fogging the inside of the frame. A few even heard a faint click when they passed too close, as if the camera inside the picture had just taken another shot. The museum tried to remove it. The curator went missing that same night. The print reappeared the next morning. Same wall, same frame. But now, there were two figures in the photo. Across the world, scattered like seeds, the Leica's victims became legends. Eliot Gray, the phantom photographer. Claire Rowan, the voice that kept recording. Dr. Meyer, the man who looked too closely. Isla Marin, the bride who never blinked. Adrian Vale, the exposure that burned reality. Detective Mara Quinn, the final witness. Each name whispered in online forums, ghost podcasts, half-forgotten documentaries. Each story ending the same way, with a photograph no one could destroy. And then there was the rumor, the one that said a new camera had surfaced again. No serial number, no record, its lens forever open. They said it was found in an empty pawn shop, still humming, a faint heartbeat pulsing beneath its shutter. Collectors called it the breathing Leica. Cynics called it marketing. But those who touched it never posted again. Some nights, under red light, if you stand in front of a mirror long enough, you'll see a flicker, a flash that shouldn't be there. That's how the story always restarts. A curious hand, a shudder, a whisper, smile. The camera never dies. It only develops new witnesses. And somewhere in the dark between seconds, a photograph waits, still forming, still breathing, still remembering you.